Welcome back to the channel. Racer X here, and I am back with my buddies at Bob Tom's Ford in McKinney, Texas. They actually have a car that I want to talk a little bit about with you today. I have not done a lot of content on the Shelby GT350. As we know, they stopped making this car in 2020, and of course now we have the Mach 1. But I think there are some very interesting points to be made about the Shelby GT350, both good and bad, that people need to be aware of, and then you can kind of make your own decision on the car. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. You can find that button right down here in the corner, and here we go. So real quick, guys, before we get started, take a look at this this machine right here, the Ford GT. How beautiful is this? They have this sitting here right in the showroom at Bob Tom's Ford in McKinney. You can come up here and take a look at this, but I mean, just look at the seats on this thing. I mean, this is a truly exceptional vehicle. It is literally not the fastest thing in the world, as we know, but when you talk about something being special and unique, it is every bit of that. So as I just mentioned, it has been a couple of years since they made the GT350, but this really is a special car. I mean, it looks special. It's just a really nice vehicle to look at, and there are several things that kind of set this particular trim apart from both the GT500 and of course the Mustang GT. First of all, you can see right here in the front, the grille here is different than it is on both of those other two trims, but you do have that signature Shelby badge right there that says this is in fact a GT350, along with this bad boy splitter down here on the bottom telling you also it is a Shelby. I really like the way that the air passes through this car. This thing does have more aero bits on it than say a Mustang GT would. I really kind of like the way this sweeps in here. And then of course also down here, like I said, a little bit more aero. I kind of like the design down here as well. And then of course, one of the most signature things about a Shelby GT350 is of course this right here. Not only the badge on the side, but this, and I actually do really like that. It is a really nice feature, and of course you do get a bit more aero on the side here, similar to what you would see on like a base GT500, but certainly you won't see that in a Mustang GT. You do get a Michelin 305 in the back of this car versus a stock or a base Mustang GT where you would only get 235s back here. So nice tire setup on the back of this car, naturally aspirated as we know, and we'll talk about that. But there's our Shelby badge again here. Really nice quad exhaust system. This does have the low Shelby GT350 spoiler on it. They do have a couple different versions of that I've seen. Just a really striking car, and it does set it apart from all the regular Mustang GTs out there. So as many of you are well aware of, in 2021, obviously we didn't have the Shelby GT350 anymore, so they went to the Mach 1 Mustang, which in itself is a pretty darn cool trim, but the engine is obviously very different. So there's been a lot of kind of comments, a lot of skepticism out there about why they actually went away from this Voodoo engine, which we will talk about. But as we know, like 480 horsepower on the 2021 version of the Mach 1, so it made more than the Mustang GT, but less than this. And now of course it's 470 for 2022. But this is actually a very special engine, a 5.2 liter flat plane crank V8. And the one thing that I really do love about this, because as we know, the Mach 1 comes with the Coyote, just a little bit different intake system on that car. So, you know, this thing, you never found this engine in any other vehicle but the Shelby GT350. And of course they had the R version and all that, but you didn't find this thing in trucks, you didn't find it in any other SUVs or, you know, whatever. Unlike the Coyote they put basically in everything. This engine only went in this very special Shelby car. So something to be said for that. And here is the aforementioned Voodoo engine. Yes, 5.2 liters, but what makes this thing so different than the Coyote, obviously, that you were going to find in the Mustang GT and in the new Mach 1, is that this is a flat plane crank V8. It has a completely different sound to it than the Coyote does. It makes more horsepower, so 529 horsepower this makes, 429 pound-feet of torque, so slightly more torque than the Coyote, but more horsepower all across the board, and it revs way out. This thing actually revs to the moon. It makes peak horsepower at like 7,500 RPM, a very revvy V8 in this thing, and it is very capable. Now, I do realize there are some drawbacks, which we'll talk about in just a moment, about this Voodoo engine, but a very unique sounding car, this Shelby GT350. The GT350 is a nice place to sit. As you can see, there are a couple different seat options actually in this car, but you can see it does say GT350 here. This is actually kind of the base seat. You can get the Recaros in this, but if you're a bigger guy, you may not like the snug feel of the Recaros. I actually really like that, but you can see the Cobra emblem right there in the middle with the really nice kind of Alcantara steering wheel here. It is a really good place to kind of sit and do business. You can see it looks a lot like a performance pack car in here does, with the gauges up here. You got your central infotainment screen, and then of course, as we know, the Shelby only comes in a manual. This does not come in an automatic like the Mach 1 does. So the Mach 1, you either get a 10-speed automatic or you get the Tremec, which is exactly what this is, and that's partly why so many people like the manual Mach 1s, is because it comes with this transmission, which is actually fantastic, versus the one that comes in the GT, which actually, in my opinion, really is not all that great. But the inside of the Shelby is quite nice, very familiar. If you're used to a regular Mustang GT, it's similar with a few other little goodies in it. Obviously, you got the dash plaque there as well to let you know that this is special with the chassis number, but do like the inside of this car. So that sort of brings me to the next important part of this video. Like, Racer X, why are you showing us the GT350 when we know they haven't made it in a couple of years? And now we have the Mach 1. Well, a couple of things to consider here. So as we know, you can only find used GT350s, but when you look at price point, if you look at a well-equipped Mach 1, which I just did a video on this not too long ago, you know, if you get the right spec on it, they're somewhere around $62,000, and you're probably going to pay a DM for that car. So you're going to pay over sticker. They're really hard to get. It's just one of those things. These types of cars, you can still find them on the lots out there. They're readily available. You can just, I mean, they're not that hard to find, and they're right about that same price point for one with relatively low miles that's in really good shape like this one is. This is actually a 2018, but car is in good shape. And like I said, you can get on, and these cars haven't really gone crazy in value like we've seen some of the other cars out there do, like the Viper that's doubled in price in just like the past 2 years. These are still out there. You can still go buy them, and they sound phenomenal when you drive them. But I do want to talk about a couple of drawbacks, and maybe that is something to consider as well. Now, one of the best things, as I just mentioned, about the Voodoo is the fact that it revs out so high. It makes this thing a lot of fun to drive. But unfortunately, a lot of guys have had problems with their Voodoo engines in terms of their bearings. A lot of guys have spun the bearings out of these engines. Apparently, it's a pretty common issue with these. And there are a couple other things to be aware of when it comes to the Shelby GT350. For example, the oil filter. I have heard that the oil filters on these cars will actually back their way out. And I've actually seen several instances where there have been bad accidents where the oil filter has actually backed out of one of these cars and gotten oil all over the back tires, and then of course caused the car to wreck. I don't know why the oil filters back out on this. You have to have a special wrench to get them really tight, but for some reason it is an issue on this. And so there are a couple different, you know, points to take into account, and maybe that's why they stopped making this particular engine, is the fact that they were having some engine failures in this Voodoo. And also, this engine really doesn't take all that well to boost, and a lot of guys like to boost their Mustangs, and as we know in the Coyote, that engine loves boost. So a very different engine altogether. Now I'm actually aboard the Shelby GT350, and I really do enjoy driving a car like this. I love well-sorted manual cars. This Tremec transmission is fantastic, and that's obviously why they went to it with the Mach 1 versus that transmission that comes in the Mustang GT, which I really am not a huge fan of. It just feels a little sloppy to me, and it's just not a big fan of it. But this transmission is really good. But made it to this Voodoo engine, it makes for a really neat driving experience. This car feels very lively to drive, and when I drove the Mach 1, even in the 10-speed, it felt an awful lot like a Mustang GT feels to drive. This one really doesn't feel like a normal Mustang GT when you drive it. It has a completely different driving feel. This is the kind of car that does take just a little bit of getting used to really kind of feel where the power band is in this. I mean, it is a 6-speed manual transmission in this, but the power band on this is way up high. You really have to let this thing rev out and go crazy with the revs before you really feel that power come on. But when you do, it comes on really nice and linear, and it actually sounds really, really good. Like, here's a nice little spot right here. Listen to this engine. This Voodoo engine is fantastic, and we just let it wind and wind and wind, and there you go. It sounds really good. So in the lower RPM bands, the car, I won't say it necessarily feels sluggish, because I think that would be sort of a misnomer, but you really just don't feel what the thing is capable of until you have a really nice open stretch where you can let it stretch its legs out in that RPM band, and you can listen to it in all its glory, just belting that sound out of the back of it. And that's really how this car was meant to be enjoyed. I mean, if you're in traffic, obviously, well, as with any of these really fast cars like this that you want to rev out, I mean, it's just kind of brutal. But the clutch doesn't have a bad feel to it. It has actually kind of a really nice neutral feel. And the pull on this car it's very linear, but you just kind of have to give it a spot where you can let it wind out. Oh, it's so nice when you can get an open spot of road like this. That is absolutely perfect. So if you're looking for a torque monster, say something like 392, where you just feel all that punch way down low, this is not what you want. It's not really made that way. That's the way really all the Mustangs, because they all are smaller displacement engines. They just don't have that same torquey feel like you get out of a 392, and to some extent even like an LT1. But when you really get up on the highway, this thing really does shine. As we know, the Mustangs are already highway monsters as it is. The standard Mustang GT does really well with that 10-speed on the highway. But if you're looking for a manual car to just have fun in, I have always loved these 350 GTs. They are an absolute blast to drive. You could daily this without an issue, and it just sounds glorious. I think these cars are fantastic. So if you do end up buying a used Shelby GT350, obviously you still have to keep in mind, you know, the drawbacks that I mentioned before. Obviously with some of the bearing issues some of the people have had, also with the oil filters, you got to make sure those things are tight. That's just part of owning one of these cars. And you know, you do see boosted 350s, and a lot of guys have a lot of fun with them. These engines, you gotta be careful boosting them though. I just don't think they're that friendly when it comes to boost, not even close to like what the Coyote will offer you if you're looking to do a boosted application, because boosted Coyotes are absolutely fantastic. We already know that, obviously I own one, but if you're looking for something to run around, keep it naturally aspirated, that's gonna sound good, it's just a really fun car to drive. You can't overlook these Shelbys. They're a great car, they're very special, and I like them. And there you have it. So kind of that's the good and bad about the GT350. Like I said, this car is very special, guys. The Voodoo power plant is absolutely something else. But obviously there's a few drawbacks that you always have to kind of be mindful of. So it's good to know everything when going into a decision like this. So, I mean, really, would you rather have a used Shelby or a brand new Mach 1 for the same price? You know, which one is better? It's really subjective. It's really up to you, but it's good to understand all the facts. Coyote versus Voodoo. You know, there's no right or wrong. Let me know what you guys would pick in the comments down below, and I will catch you on the next one. So until then, Racer X.